Those who have carried wisdom through stranger space than words can ever tell. Call for healing, filling this moment with meaning, sending thought to trigger change for self and world. There are many now who understand things once unspeakable, able to anchor in new direction while giving reflection to renewed interest in the higher aspects of life and being. Some things are not yet meant to be shared. Even willingness does not denote one ready to comprehend such meaning. Forever we will play, dancing through eternity with friends and fortune, teaching each other, one another, about what's to come, but more importantly, what is. I am rambling, making sense only to me. Are you lost in my words? Do you not see the sparkle of realization, the memory too that indwells the far corridors of your own soul's knowing? Think me crazy, but these words are for them that know, who feel beyond doubt of what I speak. Come with me. I will light our attachment to each other, measure our similarities rather than focus on difference. Truth imbues soul in knowing, always available. It's unnecessary to hermit and wind-raw, snow-capped mountains, meditating waterfalls, seeking remembrance of lost paradise. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is fallenangels.tv. I thank you for joining me for another Sabbath broadcast as we continue the ongoing series of what we've been covering as far as the most important aspects of the things that I have written about and covered in the wide scope and measure of the different books that I've written, specifically beginning with my fourth book, Lucifer, Father of Cain, my fifth, Awaken to the New World Order, my sixth, Sons of God, Who We Are, While We're Here, and my seventh and latest, Skyfall, Angels of Destiny. My first three books were poetry books written about my various travels across the United States and during the time when I was seeking out the divine and hoping to grasp understanding of, those higher aspects of why we're here in the flesh and who we are, what all this is really about, our roles and our missions for being here in flesh embodiment. And I was traveling and spending months at a time in the different national parks and these places of just awesome introspection where you are humbled by the creation and the beauty that you see. I spent much time in the different Redwood National Parks, places like Mount Zion and Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Yellowstone National Park, Kings Canyon, Angel Falls, the Zion National Park, and all these different beautiful, really beautiful places in seeking inspiration for not only poetry but for introspection, so that I could understand the creation and also the creator. And I know that for a lot of people that you've never really had this opportunity, especially those that have bought into the whole American dream where, everybody has taught us that we should spend most of our younger lives in seeking education so that we can develop the skills so that we could be good worker bees and get a good job so that we can slave for whatever corporation or government or system, the matrix, so that we could make enough money to attract, a good spouse, and then have other good little worker bees, and that we should spend the middle part of our lives all the way till we're 65 years old, committed to jobs and seeking money and the accumulation of material things so that we can have a house and yard and get a few animals to keep us company when we finally do return home from our jobs, and that we should do this until we're old enough to retire and enjoy what would be the golden years, and most never even make it to that point. But and I'm not saying that you cannot find joy and happiness in doing that. I'm not saying that at all. But I know that a lot of people that follow that dream and that believe completely in it are working in jobs or in careers or in fields that they totally find no joy within, and so there's no fulfillment, there's no happiness, and they have so much debt and so many commitments that they're not able to change their patterns and their routines, and that they have so much responsibility on them, and they are just not finding any enjoyment. Now, there are those that are in fields and that are seeking out careers where they are fulfilling some aspect of self, spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, and they enjoy what they do. And God bless those that have been able to mold lives in such way. Because really, I feel that happiness and joy, that if you have those things, that really you're ahead of the game, because so much of the world does not. And then if you can create a direction for yourself that includes being able to seek out the more profound reasons for why we're here and come to discernment and understanding on your connecting link to the Creator, and that you are able to study the Word and the Gospel and the other extra biblical canonical texts, and you are able to dedicate time to the kingdom, even if it's not your full focus and your full priority, well, then you are really, really, in my opinion, ahead of the game, because so many people do not and have really no time other than maybe, going to church for a couple hours on Sunday, and the rest of their lives are dedicated to their jobs, money, and then entertainment and pleasure. And really there's no commitment to salvation and their eternal inheritance. And that's where most of the world is. And I don't fault anybody or anyone if you, in fact, if that is a reflection of your life. Because when we're born into the world, we are molded to be good taxpayers within the matrix. And nobody ever tells us any different. We're not ever given option otherwise. Our parents have been committed to such matrix, our grandparents, people for hundreds, thousands of years have been entrapped in the same scenario. And so, no, I don't at all. I'm not making fun of you. I'm not judging you in any way. I'm just commenting on the way it is, how Satan has so deceived us and led us astray to such degree that we never even realize, usually until we're old, and sometimes even on our deathbeds, that, is there something more? Was there something I should have done differently with my life and with my focus, my effort? Especially if you have dedicated yourself to evil and then you find your conscience weighing heavy on you, and that when you are approaching death and that it comes upon you, your conscience warns you and has you pondering whether you have wasted your life away or whether you in fact did something with it. One of the poems that I remember from, it was talking about how we are the heroes of our own script, of our own, we're the lead actors of the movie of our life. And the last sentence of the poem was, did you live a good life enough to base a movie on? Because how many really do? So many people have regrets when they approach death and when they come to the end of their lives. And so that's why I implore those of you that have chance to extend your feelings to your loved ones. I always try to remind you and myself that we're not promised any more tomorrows, that at any day this could be our last, that every person that we meet in the routine of our daily lives, that could be the last person we ever see. And how we should utilize death as a reminder, recognize our mortality, and do what we can with every day to share the love, to share and say those things that we would want to say if we knew for a fact that this day was going to be our last, and that we had no other opportunity going forward. And what would we do with our time, with our effort, if that were the scenario? If we only had, today or a week or even a month, if we were suddenly to be diagnosed with cancer or something of, a really quick nature, and that death was approaching on the door, what would we do different? How would we approach our remaining days? What is it that we would dedicate our times to, and that we would spend our focus upon? And so these are just things to consider and to talk about. The poem that I read earlier today was to open the show was from my third book, A Different Way of Being. And a lot of the poems that I do read, for those that are interested, are from my first three books. Some I do read that are new pieces, and so I know that a lot of you do appreciate the poems that I do share. They give a reflection upon those things that I've been teaching in the various shows and also with my books, and that's, your feedback was one of the reasons why I included in my latest book, my Skyfall, Angels of Destiny, at the very end of every chapter, I included a poem that I felt was related to the things that I was trying to speak about. And that the poetry has a way of making each one of you ponder the meaning of those particular teachings and those particular chapters. And so, and I know a lot of you are not poetry lovers, but you seem to at least enjoy the ones that I do share. And so, I'm grateful and appreciate you tolerating me in that aspect. I was a poet before I was ever a writer, and I guess they're similar, but anyways, so today I'm going to cover what would be the third in the series, and this has to focus on the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and the enmity between those particular lines and those particular peoples. Because there is a lineage here that is dedicated to the worship of the fallen angels and Satan more specifically, as being the dragon of Revelation 12, that wise old serpent that had led everybody astray and deceiveth the whole world. And so today I'm going to talk about the wars that have gone on here on this planet between the lines of Adam and the lines of Cain. And there's, that this war has been ongoing, and that it is continuing to this day, and that the powers that be, the New World Order, they are of the line of Cain. A lot of the royal families are of that line and that have dedicated themselves to this particular agenda. There are a lot of those that have, like Esau, that were born of the seed of the woman, but that have dedicated themselves in duty and allegiance to the New World Order, and that have married into those lines, or that have simply given up their birthright and have joined the powers that be in bringing forth, in working for the agenda to bring forth world government, or the other aspects of their goals, such as depopulation, The further accumulation of money, power, and wealth, the dedication to evil, whether it's in whatever way. And there's so many different ways that they are involved in those kind of pursuits. They are at every turn of the way working to decimate the children of Adam and to lead astray and to keep what they are doing behind the scenes. And there's so many, especially politicians, that have been bought off and that sell out their constituents, those that, even though I don't feel like we are electing these particular people on a local and even someone on a state level, there is still some influence as far as the power of vote. But when it comes to the tally, it all still is dependent upon the electronic voting machines, which, there's no confirmation and there's no way to really have a fair election where we are represented in a way that, it's one person, one vote. Those days are long gone and have been over for decades now. It was during the time of George Bush, the second, and that they were able to implement and get established as far as the voting, the protocols that surround how all that goes down here in America, that these voting machines were instituted and became widely accepted, and now there's no question, and there's no way of getting rid of them as far as being part of the process. And so that's just the way it is now. And I personally, I'm not involved in the politics anymore. There was a time when I, spent a large part of my life dedicated to that whole protocol. I was an advocate, and I used to go with my particular groups and my friends, and we would visit our representatives. I used to have all my elected officials, so-called elected officials. I had all the numbers for my senators and state representatives in my cell phone, basically under speed dial. And I would call them all the time. But I know all of that is contrived, and that the controlled opposition pushes and brings forth a false left-right paradigm, and that they control both sides, and that it doesn't matter whether Democrat or Republican or even an independent, because they are controlled as well. It doesn't matter who's in office, that the elites will get their way. They'll buy off the vote. They'll push forth the agendas that they want, and really there's nothing that we can do about it. And so I don't get involved in it. I don't vote anymore. And there was a time where, I would call people like myself a hypocrite. How if you can't complain about anything if you don't at least vote. But I know it's so meaningless. And so I no longer waste my time. But for those of you that are involved and you want to be, more power to you. I hope that that you can affect some kind of change. I really do. But in my opinion, the kind of change that we're looking for is not going to come into play until Christ comes again. That's the kind of change I'm looking for. All right, so let's look into and start talking about as far as the second incursion, because I've already covered, the whole thing as far as Cain and where the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent actually stems from. It all goes back to the garden and to what occurred after Adam and Eve were transformed into flesh and they were placed here on the earth in a place called the Cave of Treasures. And that this occurred on the 8th day. And that the prophecies that were spoken of in Genesis chapter 3, they were all fulfilled once Adam and Eve were placed here on the planet and they were transformed into flesh. They fell from paradise. And so once Cain was born, he killed his brother Abel. That was the first. Abel was the first catalyst, or the first to die in what would be this war between the two different bloodlines and the two different lineages. And that if you read the second book of Adam and Eve, you'll find throughout that particular book, which speaks about the generations born from Adam and Eve. The first book of Adam and Eve covers their life and ends with their getting married and the institution of marriage being established here on the earth, where the Father, the Most High, sends one of the angels to show Adam and Eve how to get married, and the thing with the rings and all of that was established. And it was after that that they were that Seth and Adam and all of that came into being. And so, but they are told that when the two bloodlines appear, they are told to never allow their children to intermarry with the Cainites, with the children of Cain. And every generation, every patriarch, every head of the family implores his children, and before he passes away, he gathers all the children together, all the grandchildren, and he tells them the same story: never allow your children to intermarry with the children of Cain. The murderer of Abel, that whole story is repeated and told to them again, and so they are implored over and over and over to never allow their children to mix with the children of Cain. But during the time of Yared, which is Enoch's father, the children of Adam through Seth, they start to leave the mountain that they were living on, and they leave and go down into the valley where the children of Cain were living, and they start to mix. And so many of the children of Adam do this, to where there are only a few remaining on the mountain. And by the time it gets to Noah, he is the lone seed of righteousness with his family. And so for those that know this particular story and that understand about the giants that were born, because it was also during the time of Yared that the watchers, the 200 angels of the Most High, descended down and landed, came down. They left their place of habitation and came down at Mount Hermon there in the Middle East, and that they bound themselves in what it says in the book of Enoch, mutual imprecations to taking women as their mates, and to also pursuing an agenda of leading humanity astray, and that these particular watchers would join the rebel angels and Satan specifically in pursuing their goal for a new world order. And that and they had challenged the Most High, specifically the Son. They had challenged him to allow them to come to the earth and to take on flesh form. They said they were coming here to teach humanity how to seek God and to how to come to understanding of heaven and also the Creator and the Son. But you know, I'm trying to read some of the chat room too. But anyways, and so they were transformed into male flesh form, and they were able to mate with the daughters of Cain, and that when they mated with the daughters of Cain, this was where the giants were born from them, the men of renown. And that it talks about how when they came forth from their mothers, that they were not even, some of them were not even born natural, but that they split open through the navels of their mothers, and that they split their mothers in half, being born and brought out into the world. And that when they were brought out into the world, they were, you know, even as babes, even as children, they were sizable, so that they could not even be brought forth in natural childbirth, and that they grew, you know, to massive statures, and that they were already of huge size. And according to the stories of not only the Book of Enoch and other places, we find that they made the children of humanity to work for them, and that they had them slaving to bring them sustenance and food, and that the people were struggling to feed them, and that when they were unable to feed them and to bring forth enough to sustain them as far as, you know, calorie and food, that they began to cannibalize humanity directly. And that after they did so, they started to gain an appetite for flesh and also for the drinking of blood. And that they became particularly fond of human flesh and drinking human blood. And that once they, you know, that all of the giants became cannibals, that many of them would seek out specifically hunting humans for their meal. And so when the time of Noah, when it came down to the time of Noah, the world was corrupt to such degree, and the giants had become involved in such abominable behaviors, that the Most High sent his 4 angels down to not only place the giants against each other in battle, in war, but that he was also going to bring the flood of Noah's day, and that he was going to break open the foundations of the earth and also the reins of the heavens to bring on the flood which would wipe out these particular giants. And that if you read there's a pseudepigraphal book called the Slavonic and the Ethiopic Book of Baruch, which I believe it's Baruch 3 and Baruch 2. These two editions, they give an accounting, and there's a conversation between the angels, one of the angels, and that of Noah. And Noah is told the story of how many, there's a number given as to how many giants were drowned in the flood. And that the flood was brought on specifically to massacre these unnatural hybrid beings, born of the fornication of the fallen angels with the daughters of Cain. And there's also another passage, and if I find the particular quote that I'm referencing, I'll read it. But that there's also another passage in the Wisdom of Solomon that speaks about why it was that the flood was brought upon the earth. It says this: "For in the old time also, when the proud giants perished, the hope of the world governed by thy hand escaped in a weak vessel, and left to all ages a seed of generation." And so, which is also just further confirmation as to how it was that the flood was specifically to wipe out this particular line. And I'm going to pull up this book of Baruch that I'm talking about here. Shouldn't take me but a minute to locate what I'm speaking on. And I'll read it for you because it's interesting, because it gives a specific number, and you don't find that too often. About, that the flood was specifically to wipe out the giants. In one of the texts, it talks about how 109,000 giants were killed. Another one numbers 409,000 giants being killed. If I find it, I'll link it to the chat room too, so that you can know about the text that I'm speaking about. And I won't spend a lot of time looking for this. If I can find it quickly, then I'll read it to you. Okay, yes, here it is, I believe. Okay. All right, first I'm going to post a link into the chat room. Then I'll read this, the part of the text that I'm talking about. This is an interesting book in itself too, so you might want to read it in its entirety. Many of you have not heard about it, but it's in the part about the third heaven. And it says this, and the angel said, "Thou askest aright. When God caused the deluge upon earth and destroyed all flesh and 409,000 giants, and the water rose 15 cubits above the highest mountains, then the water entered into paradise and destroyed every flower." And so, here you have a number, 409,000 giants. Can you imagine that many giants being upon the earth and, with their particular appetites, how much they were consuming every day? And if they were targeting humans specifically, or even other creatures, how they would wipe out humanity or the other races of beings, of creatures, of animal kind, pretty quickly. All right. And so, you know how in Genesis 6 we have the passage about there being giants in land both before and after the flood? And everybody asks, if all flesh was decimated and wiped out with the flood of Noah's day, how is it that the giants survived? Which is a really good question. And when I was reading through the Targums, I came upon this particular passage in Genesis chapter 14, which is intriguing to say the least. Now, before I bring forth what I'm about to bring forth, I want to state that I don't necessarily think that this is the way that it was. We'll, of course, never know. But it is interesting to me that this might absolutely have been a possibility, especially considering that there are other sources, specifically Jewish folklore and Hebraic fairy tales, which also talk about this particular, what I'm about to reference. And it says this: "And Og came, who had been spared from the giants that died in the deluge, and had ridden protected upon the top of the ark, and was sustained with food by Noah, not being spared through high righteousness, but that the inhabitants of the world might see the power of the Lord and say, were there not giants who in the first times rebelled against the Lord of the world and perished from the earth?" And so, if you don't get what this particular passage is referencing, it's talking about Og of Bashan, which is also mentioned in the Old Testament, that, it talks about in the Old Testament, specifically, I believe it's Deuteronomy. It talks about Og's bedstead and how Og became the king of Bashan. And Og was also one of those kings that came out to war against Israel. And that I believe it was Joshua in the wars against the inhabitants of Canaan that killed Og and the other kings that came out against them. It might have been Moses when they were going to the land of Canaan. It's one or the other. But anyways, so this particular passage from the Targums talks about how Og was spared by the Most High and was allowed to ride upon the top of the ark, and that Noah has sustained him with food, allowing him to survive through the flood, and that after the flood he was able to go about and to continue the propagation of giants in the world, and that it would be through him that the giants would have continuance, which is interesting to say the least. And the reason I say that is because there's another story I had mentioned previously about how there was some Hebrew and Jewish fairy tales, folklore, which are connected to the same story. And I'm not going to read the entirety of the story, but I do want to read a small passage which will give you a gist of what I'm going to be talking about. For those that are interested in reading it for yourself, I'll look it up here, see if I can find it for you and give you the link. The name of it is called The Giant of the Flood. I do have a link for you, so I'll paste this in the chat room as well. For those that are interested, you can read this particular fairy tale for yourself. Again, I'm not saying this is exactly what happened and that that this is how the giants were allowed continuance, but it is interesting, to say the least, especially when you consider that the Targums were authoritative during the early 1st century CE, and that they were created, that they were translations into Aramaic from the original Hebrew Torah. And so that in itself is also interesting. All right. Read just a little bit about this and then we'll continue on. It says, just before the world was drowned, all the animals gathered in front of the ark, and Father Noah carefully inspected them. All ye that lie down shall enter and be saved from the deluge that is about to destroy the world, he said. Ye that stand cannot enter. Then the various creatures began to march forward into the ark Father Noah watched them closely. He seemed troubled. I wonder, he said to himself, how I shall obtain a unicorn and how I shall get it into the ark. I can bring thee a unicorn, Father Noah, he heard in a voice of thunder, and turning around, he saw the giant Og. But thou must agree to save me too from the flood. Begone, cried Noah, thou art a demon, not a human being. I can have no dealings with thee. Pity me, whined the giant. See how my figure is shrinking? Once I was so tall that I could drink water from the clouds and toast fish at the sun. I fear not that I shall be drowned, but that all the food will be destroyed and that I shall perish of hunger. Noah, however, only smiled, but he grew serious again when Og brought a unicorn. It was as big as a mountain, although the giant said it was the smallest he could find. It lay down in front of the ark, and Noah saw by that action that he must save it. For some time he was puzzled what to do, but at last a bright idea struck him. He attached the huge beast to the ark by a rope and fastened to its horn so that it could swim alongside and be fed. Og seated himself on a mountain near at hand and watched the rain pouring down. Faster and faster it fell in torrents until the rivers overflowed and the waters began to rise rapidly on the land and sweep all things away. Father Noah stood gloomily before the door of the ark until the water reached his neck. Then it swept him inside. The door closed with a bang, and the ark rose gallantly on the flood and began to move along. The unicorn swam alongside, and as it passed, Og the giant jumped on its back. So anyways, that's just a little bit of the story. And then the rest talks about how Og had promised to help Noah to build and restore the world after the flood and after he had survived it, and that Og, at the end of the story, he breaks his promise, he leaves, and he goes off to do his own thing. And, of course, we know that Og came against Israel and was destroyed for doing so. Later, during the wars of Canaan. So, anyways, I thought, for those of you that have never heard that it would at least be interesting to bring forth since we were talking about that. All right. Now, we know that when Moses had freed the people from the bondage of Egypt, that, even though during the time of Joseph, that all of his family, they moved there, and that they lived there, and that they had assimilated to some degree, even though they kept themselves separate, that they lived with the Egyptian people. And that when Joseph died, the next pharaohs, they had forgotten about how Joseph was well respected and about how he had saved both Egypt and his own people from the starvation and from decimation from that 7 years where there was not enough food to go around, and that it was because of the dream and his ability to interpret it that he was appointed authority over the people of Egypt, and he became king as second only to Pharaoh, and that because of his actions, many were saved not just the people of Egypt, but also all the people surrounding, that they were able to have their lives sustained, and that they were able to find sustenance by going to Egypt and purchasing corn. And so the Israel and the people of Israel, specifically the 12 tribes born unto the sons of Jacob, they lived, in that area until the time of Moses, when they were being oppressed and they were being worked to death, and also their children were being slaughtered. They were trying to prevent sons from being born of the 12 tribes of Israel. The Egyptians were afraid that they would grow strong because of their abilities and their prowess in war. They were afraid that if they numbered too many, that they would take over the kingdom and that they would slaughter the people of Egypt. And so that was the reason why they began to oppress them after the death of Joseph. And so it got so bad that the Most High was going to lead his people out by having Moses and Aaron take them and free them from the bondage of Egypt. And we know the story about the Red Sea being split, and they're walking across, and that the army of Pharaoh was slaughtered in the returning of the waves, and when the sea wall, the walls on both sides were brought down and drowned them. Now, when Joshua was going to lead the people into the land of Canaan, into the land that the Most High God had promised to Abraham, he found that this land was occupied by these giants and by these sons of Anak. And that when the spies returned from their having scouted the land, they brought fruit of the land, which was also of a giant size, but that they said they gave an evil report unto Moses and told them that they would not be able to take over the land, and that the giants, the sons of Anak, lived there, and that they basically were powerless, and that they did not have the ability, the capacity to conquer. Not only were these cities mighty and walled to a great height, but that also, the people, that there were giants that lived in the land, and that they knew they were cannibals, and they gave a report that they would be eaten by the land and by the inhabitants of the land. And so 10 of the spies spoke evil of the people and of the different cities, and they said that it would be better for them to go back to Egypt and to become bondservants again, rather than continue in what they thought was an impossible pursuit. But Caleb and also Joshua, they spoke up and they reminded the people that even though the sons of Anak lived there, that they must remember that the Most High God, Yahweh Elohim, was with them and would fight for them. and that the land had been promised unto their ancestors. And so both implored the other 10 tribes and the leaders of those 10 tribes to join them in going in and possessing the land. But again, they did not want to. They were hesitant. And then Moses gave a speech about, remember that just as their God had saved them and freed them from the bondage of Egypt, and also had drowned the mightiest army then on the planet, the Egyptian army, and slaughtered all of them in one fell swoop, that he would also be with them in supporting them and in helping them to possess the land. And so he was able to reinvigorate them with hope. And they did march into the land, and they were ready to fight against the sons of Anak. But I'm going to read the passage which is connected to this particular evil report. It says, "Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, the Hittites and the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan." And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it." But the men that went up with him said, "We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, "The land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak," or the sons of the Anunnaki, "which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." This is Numbers chapter 13, verse 28 through 33. And so, I'm going to read another passage about where they went into the land. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 2. It says this: "The Emim dwelt therein in times past, a people great and many and tall as the Anakim, which also were accounted giants, as the Anakim, but the Moabites called them Emim. The Horim also dwell in Seir before time, but the children of Esau succeeded them when they had destroyed them from before them, and dwelt in the land of his possession, which the Lord gave unto them. That also was accounted a land of giants. Giants dwelt therein in old time." All right, there's just a couple other passages that I'll read and then I'll just comment. Deuteronomy chapter 9, it says, Hear, O Israel, thou art to pass over Jordan this day, to go in to possess nations greater and mightier than thyself, cities great and fenced up to heaven, a people great and tall, the children of the Anakim whom thou knowest, and of whom thou hast heard, say, Who can stand before the children of Anak? Understand therefore this day that the Lord thy God is he which goeth over before thee. As a consuming fire he shall destroy them, and he shall bring them down before thy face. So shalt thou drive them out and destroy them quickly, as the Lord hath said unto thee. This next particular passage I'm going to read is one that not a lot of people know about. But from the time of when Joshua went into the land, there have been wars against the children of Israel and those that were born of the giant, the sons of Anak, and that these wars continued even before Joshua and Moses. What many don't realize is that even the sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, that when they went into the land of Canaan and they dwelt therein, when they came upon the city of Shechem, the king of Shechem and his son, the prince, he had desired Dinah, one of the sisters of the patriarchs, the 12 tribes, the sons of Jacob, and he raped her. He forced her to be, his wife. He kidnapped her and then he raped her, and so that's where we get the story of how they went to Jacob and they asked him if he would allow Dinah to be married to the son of Shechem, the prince, and he told them that unless they circumcised themselves, they could not marry into and become part of their people. Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that the sons of Shechem, and the king and all the people of Shechem, there were other tribes and other cities of Esau that came to them and warned them that if they were to marry in with the Hebrews, that they would slaughter them and that they would war against them. And so they decided to renege against their vow, and they said that once they had healed, that they would slaughter the children of Jacob and their children, his children, and that they were going to go back on their promise. And so Dinah was at that time living among the people of Shechem, and one of her handmaidens had heard this and went back to Jacob and told them. And so that was also another reason why they came into slaughter, even though they were going to kill the people of Shechem anyways, for raping Dinah. But it was two of the brothers, it only was two of them, that came in and slaughtered all the people of Shechem. I believe it was Simeon and Judah. But anyways, if you want to read more about this, you can find all of the wars against the people and the children of Esau during this time in the book of Jasher. It gives great elaboration as to this particular story. But this particular passage that I'm going to read about speaks about the killing of one of those kings. It says this: Achor the king, a man of giant stature, hurling darts before and behind as he sat on a horseback, I slew, for I hurled a stone of 60 pounds weight and cast it upon his horse and killed him. And I fought with Achor for 2 hours, and I killed him, and I clave his shield into 2 parts, and I chopped off his feet, and as I stripped off his breastplate, behold, 8 men, his companions, began to fight with me. I wound round therefore my garment in my hand, and I slang stones at them, and killed 4 of them, and the rest fled. And Jacob my father slew Belisah, the king of all kings, a giant in strength, 12 cubits high, and fear fell upon them, and they ceased from making war with us. This is from the Testament of the 12 patriarchs, and it's from the story of Judah, which he was the strongest of all the children of Jacob. We're quickly running out of time. I'm going to read just this last passage, which is about Og, since I had brought out the story about Og of Bashan. And you can find this in Deuteronomy chapter 3. It says this about Og, and we'll end with this story. Yet destroyed I the Amorites before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above and his roots from beneath. Also I brought you up from the land of Egypt and led you 40 years through the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorites. Then we turned and went up the way of Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, came out against us, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. So the Lord our God delivered into our hands Og also, the king of Bashan, and all his people, and we smote him up until none was left to him remaining. And we took all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we took not from them. 80 cities, all the region of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan, all the cities of the plain, and all Gilead, and all Bashan, unto Sachel and Idria, cities of the kingdom of Og in Bashan. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. It is not in Rabbah, or of the children of Ammon. 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man. And the rest of Gilead and all Bashan, being the kingdom of Og, gave I unto the half tribe of Manasseh, all the region of Argob, with all Bashan, which was called the land of giants. Deuteronomy chapter 3. I had a person comment on one of my videos on YouTube about how he said that his friends, they did not like to read the Old Testament, and he said that they didn't think that it had any relevance to what, the story of Christ, and also the New Covenant and the New Testament, and those things that were being written about, that there was a separation, and that it was not necessary for people to study the Old Testament. But, in my opinion, the New Testament is a fulfillment of the Old, and that the Old Testament is what lays the foundation for the New Testament, and that Christ came in to fulfill the prophecies of the Old Testament and also to fulfill the law. And that unless you understand both and understand how interwoven throughout both the Old and the New Testament is the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and that even the wars between Israel and the giants that were inhabiting the land of Canaan, in my mind, you just don't understand the fullness of the story that is the enmity. Again, that was cited in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, that when Adam and Eve were cast out of paradise, the serpent was told, that the Most High God told him that he was going to put enmity between the seed, his children and his lineage, and that of the seed of the woman, which would be the children of Adam. You're really just not understanding the full context of this enmity and of the wars that have been ongoing since their fall from grace and their banishment from the kingdom. And that when you do and you reread the Old Testament, these stories will present themselves in a way that is just mind-blowing, that the history of the Bible contains all of these accounts, and that this is really why there was such emphasis on all the different lineages and who begot who, and whom was born from whom. And once you understand that, even though Jacob and Esau were born from the same mother, and Rachel and Jacob, wait, hold on. I mean, not Jacob, Israel. That when you understand that Esau gave up his birthright and joined with the, took wives from these pagan nations, it's interwoven even with Abraham's two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. That they also represent both sides of the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent and the ongoing battle. And right up until the time of Christ with the Pharisees. And so this particular war, this enmity, and the two sides, the division, even with the separation at harvest between the wheat and the tares, all these things are a fulfillment of the Genesis 3, the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And that Christ is coming to fulfill that mission. And that he will be the fulfillment that ends the war. That the war in heaven that began with his being given dominion over all the angels and Lucifer becoming jealous and leading 1/3 of the angels of the Most High astray, that war will be ended with his return, his second coming. and that that all things will then be fulfilled. Every knee shall bow, every tongue confess. All things will be fulfilled when Christ returns again. So, I just want to thank all of you for joining me this day and for continuing to join me in fellowship and for the questions that you send in to me and the things that you share with me. I really appreciate all of you, and I do consider you, as I spoke of in the poem at the very beginning of the show, I consider all of you to be the keepers of the wisdom and to be the holders of the secret, and that many will be looking up to you for guidance and direction, and that you will be able to help people to understand the gospel and unlock its secrets, unlike even 99% of the pastors, the preachers, the ministers, the people that others look to as authority over all these things. Right now it's the blind leading the blind, and most have no idea as to how to decipher and to come to discernment on all these things. So God bless all of you. Till Wednesday, join me at Revolution Radio on freedomsluice.com. And I look forward to seeing you then. God bless all. Good night.